Good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Electric Bison. This has been quite a week for me. There was an election this week where a woman was nominated to run for the U.S. Senate in the general election against two other good candidates. But she's a good candidate too, and I hope that Montanans will give her serious consideration. I think she's got the strength of character to do what's required in Washington. I was down in Miles City with Magoo. Miles City, I was a kid down there for 7 years of my life. It was a wonderful place to grow up. And one time in my 11th birthday, I got a compass. And my dad gave it to me, and my brother and I went across the river to the bluffs, and we're playing around up there on those bluffs above the sugar slide where the condominiums are now. And I hit my head on what I thought was a root of a sagebrush. I was down in a gully. It turned out to be the forearm and finger bones of a person. And I took it into the biology teacher in Sacred Heart High School, the nun there, and she said, yeah, it was human bones. And for, I guess it's been the better part of 70 years. I've been always wondering who would be out there. Well, this week I got some kind of satisfaction on that. It was really pretty nice for me. Magoo and I went and pretty well fixed in our mind how the war between the Native Americans, the Great Sioux War, which also included an important episode in the Cheyenne life, not just the Sioux, but how that ended after the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And we went to some of the places, the Battle of the Butte, Battle of the Lame Deer's Battle, went on up over above Terry to where Ash Creek is, where some of the Northern Cheyenne, or some of the Sioux were brought in by Colonel Miles's men. And we put that all together in our mind and had a really nice visit in Miles City. Went out to the cemetery where two Medal of Honor winners recipients are buried. Sergeant Henry Hogan has 2 Medals of Honor. He's one of only 19 people in the country that have more than 1 Medal of Honor in the history of this country. And Private Pym, he was with the 7th Cavalry in a water carrier. Henry Hogan, the one with the 2 Medals of Honor, he was with the 5th Infantry at Fort Keogh. It's very interesting, and I enjoyed it tremendously. And then the Range Riders Museum there was just tremendously helpful. I got some good information on the old architecture of Miles City and how the river used to run, and when they brought the old jail in from Milestown, which was out on the west side of the town, right up against the cantonment. It was just a rickety old fort initially, before it became Fort Keogh, and it was pretty much of a hellhole. Miles said he had more trouble with the people that were contaminating his soldiers than he had with the Native Americans. Anyhow, it was really pretty cool. So I had a lot more questions when I came back. I had the dates in mind when the Buffalo Calf Road woman died from the white man's coughing disease, and when her husband, Black Coyote, or Black Wolf is what they call it in Miles City, and his 2 associates died by self-hanging, it was said, in the jail in Miles City. Had all that in mind, but I still had a lot of questions. And so I came here to the Historical Society. This is the herd bull in front of the Historical Society, which I think is appropriate to thinking about Buffalo Calf woman, who the Cheyenne call Calf Woman. And by the way, we had a good talk with Eugene Little Coyote down at the Northern Cheyenne tribal offices. We had a great trip. But anyhow, when I got back here, I came over and had done some work, and I pinned down exactly who was running that jail when Black Coyote died. And it was a deputy marshal who later became the first elected sheriff of Miles City. His name was Thomas Irvine. He was an old Indian fighter. He'd been a scout for Miles. And here at the Historical Society, they have his diaries the diary for 1879. I went through that diary. And on June 2nd, 1879, his diary shows that so it was a Monday, he went out to Fort Keogh and he got black coyote, or he called him black wolf, and stretched neck and hole in the breast, brought him in and put him in jail, and they put charges against him. It was the first time in a non-military court, a civilian court, in eastern Montana, and they indicted him for murder in the first degree. So on Tuesday they had the trial. Before they had the trial, he, according to his diary, he went out and he got Sergeant Kennedy, the guy who had been shot, the survivor of the Mizpah incident, where Private Bader was killed when they were fixing the telegraph line from Fort Keogh down to Deadwood. And they brought a doctor too for a witness. And so they had the trial. They did that, and they had the trial, and they found the judge found him guilty, and they sentenced him to hang July 17th, more than a month later. So that was on a Tuesday. Then on a Wednesday, he kind of moved the prisoners around. He put the two associates of Black Coyote in one cell, put Black Coyote and another guy in another cell, and they had 4 cells in that early jail, and then a couple other guys in 2 other cells, because they had rumor there was going to be a breakout. And what's interesting to me is Ex Beadler, the famous vigilante from western Montana, also deputy marshal, was down in Miles City, and he and Irvine are old buddies. They knew each other. So what happened was, on Thursday night, a guy named Wash Kelly, who was the jailer, he came over to wherever Beadler was and Irvine, and told him that he thought the Indians were hanging themselves. So Irvine went over with another guy named Bowen and Wash Kelly, and they went in, and there was a thong in the jail and around the bars in the jail door, and they couldn't get the door open in the room where these 2 Indians were, and so they had to cut the thong, and then 4 of them together pushed the door open. I don't know who the 4th person was, and there's 2 dead Indians in there. And then somehow the 3rd dead Indian happened the same night. So they took the bodies and put them out in a yard, and the whole town showed up. Everybody was oohing and ahhing over these dead Indians. And then in his diary, he says on Thursday, he handed the Indians over to their people, to the Cheyenne. There was a Cheyenne camp there in the river bottom, the Tongue River. I suppose it was both for the Cheyenne scouts that were already working under 2 Moons for General Miles, and for anybody else that was there, possibly, and I think probably Buffalo Calf Road woman was there when she died just a few days before from white man's coughing disease. So it was all very interesting to me. So here I am, this guy that remembers seeing these bones, getting these bones, bringing them into town from up on the Yellowstone Bluffs, knowing full well that in June, the Yellowstone River, is not something you want to mess around with. It's pretty serious body of water. So how would those bones, how would those people, those Northern Cheyenne, get over to a preferred burial place, which would be up on the bluffs overlooking Miles City? So turns out, also in the diary, Irvine says that after he handed the bodies over to their people, he said, an orderly came from Fort Keogh, from General Miles, saying, don't let them come onto the reservation, across the river onto the reservation, the bodies. So he, having been a scout for Miles, he gets on and he goes over to the reservation to talk, to find out what the deal is, because that's not something he had planned on. And he's met by an officer named Lieutenant Bowen. Lieutenant Bowen said, "Don't worry, it's okay. They're taking care of it." So that really got my attention, and taking care of the bodies. So I did some more looking around, and it turns out that the Post returns some of the different military type record keeping, which I haven't got into personally, but I used AI to find it. But when I asked it, I said, "Is there a chance that the commander of Fort Keogh would have given permission to use a military ferry to cross the Yellowstone River to these Northern Cheyenne?" The answer was absolutely yes, every time I asked it. And they had a military escort, and they used a cable flatboat, a military ferry, to get them across the river. And then they had a burial party in Northern Cheyenne, and they buried these people. So there's still no mention of Buffalo Calf Road woman, but my sense is, since the accepted story to this point has been, well, when she died, word got into the jail to Black Coyote that his wife had died, and he was desolate, and he killed himself. That's what the story's been. Well, that's not quite true, because he wasn't in the jail till the day before his trial when Irvine went to get him. So he might have found out about it when he was over on the other side of the river at Fort Keogh, wherever he was being held by military authorities up to that time. So it's very interesting, isn't it? So I think that Buffalo Calf Road woman, or Calf woman, the Eugene Little Coyote says the Northern Cheyenne are calling her Calf woman now. Calf woman probably was buried or properly shown with proper Cheyenne respect in the same funeral party as the three guys that supposedly hung themselves. Now, what I find, there's a couple of things that are about this that are interesting. There's never been any investigation of what happened in that jail. Nothing. These three Cheyennes supposedly hung themselves because all three of them were feeling terrible about Buffalo Calf Road woman dying. But it's interesting that in Irvine's diary a few days before, he makes note that 4 Crow Indian had been killed by a guy, and then he mentions who the guy is, doesn't do anything about it. And the murders going on in Miles City at the time were just unbelievable. I mean, it was a hellhole. It truly was. And this guy had his hands full. I mean, I'll give him that. But 4 years after these events happened, and I do think that the Cheyenne were assisted by General Miles. By doing that, some writers say that he sealed his working relationship with the Cheyenne Scouts, which he'd been dependent upon, that had come in with 2 moons, and then he started getting more, and he had them for years. And they were very valuable to him in accomplishing his mission. So this was a way to seal that, a show of respect. But a couple of years later, the newspaper down in Glendive had an editorial about it's okay to have vigilantes once in a while. And the editor of the paper that wrote that, his initials were WWM. He apparently sent in the folder with Irvine's papers is a list of the vigilantes in the Vigilance Committee in Miles City, and Irvine's on, and it was submitted by a concerned citizen to the Glendive paper to get them to publish the names. Well, this WWM, the editor, didn't do it. Instead, he wrote a note on the list, and it's in Irvine's paper saying, you know, I don't see a need to publish this. WWM from Glendive. That meant that probably Irvine was highly respected, which he was. But what's interesting to me is on the list of vigilance, of the Vigilance Committee in Miles City, Irvine's name's on it, right? And then Wash Kelly, the guy that came over that night to say that I think they're hanging themselves. And then X Beadler, who's a well-known vigilante here in western Montana, was there, actually physically there at the time. And that puts up some real warning alarms to me that something else happened in that jail than what's been the accepted wisdom. Then the other thing that happened is about a year after the Glendive paper, there was a Glendive article, an editorial, and the whole thing with that editor. The one person who covered the trial, his name was T.P. McElrath. He was from a newspaper family back east, and he started the Yellowstone Journal just a month after the trial, but he was there to cover that trial. He just got to Miles City, and some of his stuff is in the newspapers if you look around. But in his Yellowstone Journal, he published an article that had been published in the Fort Benton paper, where a lot of soldiers go up there, and they talk about how in Miles City the Indians not only, they went through these great contortions to hang themselves using the incident Black Coyote. But what's interesting to me is you said there was 4 Indians. Well, I don't think there was 4. I think there was 3. Unless the information got to Fort Benton from some of the soldiers who were involved in that escort detail across the river. And possibly the 4th Indian was Buffalo Calf Road Woman. But that's kind of a stretch on my part. Anyhow, I'm feeling pretty satisfied that I kind of know what happened, and it's good to know that the people involved, especially Buffalo Coyote Woman, was treated with some respect, and how that would have happened. Yeah, it's an important part of Montana history. And I do think that the strength of our women is something we really need to not take for granted anymore. And I'm really hopeful that the woman who is now running for the U.S. Senate against a snake eater, a guy who is, he's running as an independent, he was special forces and all that jazz, and then a guy who's been handpicked by Senator Daines. Well, the snake eater was handpicked by Senator Tester, let's face it. That she gets a good look from the people of Montana. We need a change like that. We need that kind of mental toughness, and she's thrown some serious people in jail. So give her a chance, and maybe in this year we can celebrate all that Buffalo Calf Road Woman did for her people by getting ourselves a good, tough woman to represent us in the United States Senate. Thanks.